To liberate all sentient beings as infinite as space, please give rise to the supreme and precious Bodhicitta. With that motivation, we shall continue our teaching on the Heart Sutra. This time I will primarily use the version translated by Xuanzang for our explanation. Why choose the version translated by Xuanzang? As I mentioned yesterday, on one hand, it possesses a supreme power of blessing. On the other hand, in almost every corner of the world today, whenever the Heart Sutra is recited or studied in Chinese, Xuanzang's translation is almost exclusively used. Therefore, it is most appropriate for us to use this version. Admittedly, when compared to the Tibetan or Sanskrit texts, Xuanzang's translation might appear somewhat incomplete at first glance. It lacks the introductory section describing its origin, and it also omits the concluding section on its propagation. Because of this, some might feel that it is imperfect. Some people may have that impression. However, scholars in the Han region, such as the elder lay practitioner Huang Nianzu, suggested that Xuanzang intentionally omitted the beginning and ending sections. His goal was to highlight the core teaching, the view of emptiness. That is why those sections were not translated. While we can certainly understand it that way, I personally wonder, why did Xuanzang choose this specific version to translate? There must have been many Sanskrit manuscripts in India, but the Sanskrit text Xuanzang used was actually given to him by Avalokiteshvara in person. Why do I say this? I mentioned the story yesterday. According to historical records, before Xuanzang set out, an elderly monk gave him this Sanskrit text. He recited it throughout his entire journey. Whenever he encountered obstacles or danger, he would chant the Heart Sutra. Upon his return, he wished to express his deep gratitude. But when he went looking for the elderly monk, not only was the monk gone, but the entire monastery where the sick man had stayed had vanished without a trace. There was absolutely nothing to be found there. Since then, people have often said that the monk back then must have been an emanation of Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara personally handed the Sanskrit text to Xuanzang. When we examine this through our own discernment, we find that this explanation makes perfect sense. The blessing of Avalokiteshvara is truly inconceivable. Furthermore, when Shakyamuni Buddha expounded this sutra, the Heart Sutra was presented as a dialogue between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. The entire content of the Heart Sutra consists of the words of Avalokiteshvara. Therefore, if Avalokiteshvara manifested in person to give the text to Xuanzang, it carries a profound significance and connection. So in your daily practice, reciting the standard Chinese version is perfectly fine. However, when teaching others or seeking to understand the full meaning, there is no harm in including the beginning and ending sections. There is nothing wrong with that. For the purpose of study or to grasp the entire context of the sutra, having those extra sections creates no contradiction at all. I hope that whenever you face obstacles, hardships, or suffering in the future, you will do as we discussed yesterday, focus your mind on the state of emptiness and recite the Heart Sutra. It will surely bring blessings. The blessing of Avalokiteshvara is truly beyond imagination. For example, in our academy, or in the life of His Holiness Jigme Phuntsokrin, whenever obstacles appeared in his enlightened activities, he would frequently recite the name of Avalokiteshvara or chant Om Mani Padme Hum. He used the mantra of Avalokiteshvara to dispel these obstacles. I am sure many of you remember this very clearly. Throughout history, the great masters of Tibetan Buddhism have always practiced in this way. Furthermore, in the Han region, there are many accounts of Avalokiteshvara saving those in distress. Stories of such spiritual responses are quite numerous, especially concerning the great masters of ancient times. The records of the obstacles they encountered during their journey of cultivation are well documented, so I won't go into detail here. There are many books on this subject which many of you have likely read, so there is no need to repeat them. Even for those who are not yet Buddhist, reciting Avalokiteshvara's name brings immense merit. The elder lay practitioner Huang Nianzu once shared a story from his time at the Lotus Vihara in the United States. It was about a non-believer who received a profound blessing or response. He said that someone from the Lotus Vihara was truly saved and protected by the grace of Avalokiteshvara. This person from the Lotus Vihara had started a family and had a child in mainland China. On his return journey, he encountered a major crisis. What kind of crisis? He was traveling by plane, and as the aircraft was approaching its descent, the pilot emerged from the cockpit and told everyone in a panic, "The plane has suffered a mechanical failure. There is absolutely nothing we can do now. Please find your own way to survive, whether by using a parachute or any other means. As soon as the pilot finished speaking, everyone on the plane seemed to be paralyzed with shock. They were at a complete loss. The man from the Lotus Vihara momentarily lost all sense of feeling. He was likely terrified. Then a thought came to him, though it wasn't for himself. He thought, I have only been married for a short time. What will happen to my poor child and wife if I were to die now? This was the first thought that occurred to him. At that moment, the passengers were crying and screaming, completely overcome by panic and confusion. They were truly helpless and under extreme stress. He had never prayed to Buddha or believed in Buddhism before, but right then he thought to himself, I have heard before that Avalokiteshvara saves those in suffering. No matter what, I must pray with sincerity. He began to recite Avalokiteshvara's name continuously. In that moment, in his experience, Avalokiteshvara truly appeared before him. He shouted to the crowd, crying is of no use, and urged everyone to recite Avalokiteshvara together. By doing so, we might dispel this obstacle and have a chance to be saved. He began to chant the name loudly and fervently. Before they knew it, the plane landed very smoothly. At that point, they all felt it was extraordinary. The pilot had apparently fainted, but when he regained consciousness, he realized they had landed safely, without his knowing how. The man later shared his personal experience with many people, and it has since been documented. As you may know, Huang Nianzhu had a background in the material sciences. He had previously made significant contributions to physics. Combined with his deep faith in the Buddha Dharma, when such a wise person speaks, his words are generally free from exaggeration. These stories are not just ancient legends or myths. In 1987, the year His Holiness visited Mount Wutai, we also heard about this event back in the Han region. By chanting the name of Avalokiteshvara, everyone on that plane was saved. So whenever we encounter obstacles or go through moments of pain, we should recite the Heart Sutra with single-minded devotion. In the past, many people in the Han region would write out the Shurangama mantra or the Heart Sutra, fold them into small scrolls, and wear them around their necks. Within Buddhism, especially in the sutras that praise the merit of emptiness, it is often taught that if we carry the great compassion mantra or sutras on emptiness, even the breeze that blows past us will benefit the beings it touches, protecting them from falling into the 3 lower realms. If you carry these teachings on emptiness with you, then even the water you bathe in, should it reach any creature in the great ocean, will ensure they are not reborn in the lower realms. Similarly, if those who recite the Heart Sutra or Great Compassion Mantra scold or speak harshly to others, any being who hears that sound will also be spared from the 3 lower realms. This doesn't mean they achieve immediate liberation, but it shows the profound merit of the teachings on emptiness. We should all have confidence in this. Why did we choose Xuanzang's translation this time? Personally, I feel that, although compared to the Tibetan version and the translations by 5 or 6 other masters in the Han region, when making a comparison, there are some parts missing at the beginning and the end, and some of the wording inside has slight discrepancies compared to the Tibetan text. But I dare not change a single word. We should recite it just as it is. This is personally blessed by Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. Moreover, this Heart Sutra, I believe, is not only popular within the Buddhist community, but it has also reached many different spheres, including academic and cultural circles, spreading very widely. You often see it on various products as well, for example on some teacups, which have the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra written on them. It is printed on some katas and on all sorts of other items. Even people in the secular world are engaging with it. The other day in Yunnan, I saw a person with a disability who had lost both of his hands. It seems he lost them on a train track in the past. But this person is incredibly capable. He was recognized as one of the top 10 outstanding youths in China last year. Out of the entire country, only 10 exceptional young people were chosen, and he was one of them. Of course, he has many wonderful qualities, and what is one of those qualities? He often holds a calligraphy brush in his mouth and starts writing. The characters he writes are exceptionally beautiful and exquisite. He frequently writes the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra for others. Some provincial and municipal leaders from various places all ask him for a copy of the Heart Sutra to take back. That day, a Dharma friend was there asking him to write the Heart Sutra and offered him 3,000 yuan, but he did not want to accept it. It was the people next to him who said, just give him a little something. Writing a single character takes a lot of effort. Later that person also thought, after all, this is the Heart Sutra, so I'll just make an offering as an act of merit anyway, and so he gave 3,000 yuan and asked him to write a copy. When I saw his skill, I found it truly inconceivable. Even if we were to write with our right hand or a brush, we wouldn't be able to write it well at all. Yet he writes it with his mouth, and he does it incredibly well. When it's convenient, I can show it to you. Many of us who have hands might feel a little embarrassed. He writes the Heart Sutra so beautifully with his mouth, while we might spend a long time with our right hand and still not be able to write it that well. I think this might also be the blessing of the Heart Sutra. Last year at Renji Hospital in Shanghai, there was a hospital official who had a unique artistic skill. He could carve the Heart Sutra on a very, very tiny seal. For instance, a 3-character name like mine could be written on something incredibly small, perhaps even finer than a single hair. When we looked at it through a magnifying glass, the Heart Sutra was indeed engraved there perfectly complete. He is also a very famous painter in China. So sometimes I think the blessings of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva or the blessings of the Heart Sutra can truly be said to be inconceivable. Sometimes the blessings of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva truly manifest in the world, not only within our Buddhist community but also in the cultural sphere and even among ordinary people, appearing in various ways to guide sentient beings. The year before last, on the National Spring Festival Gala, a group of disabled performers danced the 1,000-hand and 1,000-eye Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva. This performance also won awards internationally. These performers on the surface are all deaf and mute, but through their performance of the 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, countless beings who watched it shed tears and gave rise to faith. Even people who do not believe in Buddhism were deeply moved. Therefore, as Buddhists, towards the merit of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva or the blessings of the Heart Sutra, why wouldn't we generate faith? We certainly should be able to generate faith. However, I sometimes think that although the merit of the Heart Sutra is so immense, when it comes to truly explaining the Heart Sutra, many explanations are not completely satisfying. Perhaps this is a kind of arrogance on my part. I have said this many times before. Many Dharma masters and lay practitioners in various practice centers and on different occasions have taught the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra, the principle that form is not different from emptiness and emptiness is not different from form, on the surface might seem passable and acceptable. But sometimes, when using a slightly more profound approach to explain the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the explanations are not entirely satisfying. Some people recite the Heart Sutra their entire lives, but if you ask them about the principles of the Heart Sutra, they cannot explain it. So I think on the one hand, during this time we have studied many Madhyamaka treatises, such as the root stanzas of the Middle Way, entering the Middle Way, the 400 verses, and so on. Conversely, if the Heart Sutra, with just over 200 words, cannot be explained properly, I am afraid it would be a bit unreasonable. Furthermore, in the future, when propagating the Dharma and benefiting beings, if you say, I am going to teach you the 400 verses or the root stanzas of the Middle Way, the people in the audience are leading increasingly busy lives with a faster and faster pace of life. In that case, it is hard to say whether they will have the time. But if, when we turn the wheel of Dharma, we say, I am going to teach you the Heart Sutra. When I taught it to them over there, I finished teaching it in about 45 minutes. The teaching was already complete. In this way, it is also a bit more convenient to gather disciples. So taking all aspects into consideration, I decided that this time we should discuss the Heart Sutra. First, let's look at the title of the Heart Sutra. Everyone should have a copy of the text. Originally, there is an Indian commentary by Master Jinnamitra, which, if it's convenient for the copy room, can be printed out for you. If it's not convenient or if there isn't enough time, it's fine not to print it. You can decide based on the situation. As for how long I will teach, it is hard to say right now. Perhaps it will take 6 or 7 days. If time permits, I might explain it a bit more broadly, but perhaps I will keep it brief. Some time ago I heard that Khenpo Tsultrim Lodro explained the beginning very broadly and then just read through the rest in one day. Some people had opinions about that. I don't know exactly how he taught the first part, but I heard that regarding form is not different from emptiness. He elaborated quite a bit, so I will also start by explaining the interdependent origination a bit more extensively for everyone. Now let's begin by looking at the title of the Heart Sutra, which is the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra. The word Prajnaparamita itself is entirely from Indian Sanskrit. Prajna actually means wisdom, and Paramita means reaching the other shore, or the other shore reached. There are two ways to explain it. So when combined, what does reaching the other shore mean? In many texts today it is extended to mean the paramita in the 6 paramitas. Therefore the term Prajnaparamita, when put together, means the perfection of wisdom. In Sanskrit it is Prajnaparamita, which in our modern language means wisdom reaching the other shore. Everyone should be clear that prajna means wisdom. However, there is worldly wisdom, supramundane wisdom, and also unsurpassable wisdom. Worldly wisdom is like the mundane knowledge of today, such as being highly proficient in technology, computers, or engineering. It is what worldly people often refer to as being clever and sharp, which is considered worldly wisdom. But this worldly wisdom is actually not ultimate. Why is it not ultimate? It is because we perceive what is empty as not empty, perceive the non-existent self as existent, perceive the impure as pure, and perceive what is not joyful as happiness. Thus it never departs from the 4 inversions. Therefore worldly wisdom is not ultimate. People in the world may consider someone a wise person, whether they are a scientist, writer, or physicist. From the perspective of worldly people, they certainly possess a degree of intelligence and can be called wise. However, from a supramundane perspective, which is the perspective of ultimate wisdom, they are not truly wise and could perhaps be called foolish. It has been a long time since I sat like this, so even sitting for a short while feels uncomfortable, because I was constantly lying down and sleeping in the hospital a while ago. Just after being discharged, I would want to sleep after just a short time. No matter what, human habits are quite formidable. We are all like this, aren't we? Sometimes if you sleep in for several days, then you just don't want to get up. But if you are especially diligent for a few days, you won't feel like sleeping in. So these habits are very hard to articulate, because I basically was lying down continuously for such a long time. Recently, when sitting for a bit, I kept wanting to lie back down again and again, as if there was simply no way around it. The other day when I was in Beijing, there was an old doctor, 72 years old. That doctor could stand for the whole day but could not sit down. I asked him, "Why are you like this?" Because at that time when he was examining me and doing some physical therapy, he was standing there the whole time, and he is over 70 years old. I said, "You should probably sit on this sofa for a bit." He said, "I can stand all day, but I cannot sit." Later I asked why, and he said, "When I was 20 years old, I started doing this kind of work, standing in front of patients all day long. Now in my 70s I cannot lie down, and on Sundays I feel very miserable." So everyone should be mindful of their habits, whether it involves sitting or standing. Truly, many of human behaviors are directly related to one's own conditioning. In the past, sitting here for 2 hours was absolutely no problem for me. Now it has been an hour and I can hardly sit still, and my legs are particularly painful. Just now we talked about worldly wisdom, which is not ultimate. People may think it is very ultimate, but in reality it is not. There is also a supramundane wisdom. What kind of wisdom is this? It is the wisdom of the Shravakas and Arhats who have realized the selflessness of the person. They know that samsara is suffering, that all phenomena are impermanent, and that nirvana is true peace. This possesses the qualities of the 4 seals and can be called supramundane wisdom. The third is the unsurpassable wisdom, which is the wisdom of the Buddha. The Buddha perfectly realized the selflessness of persons and phenomena, and fully comprehended the true nature of all things. Therefore the prajna we are discussing here can be considered the most unsurpassable prajna. Everyone should be clear that paramita means reaching the other shore. In the world, there is also a sense of reaching the other shore, like when a person completes their career, which can be considered a kind of other shore. Why is it called the other shore here? Because samsara is this shore, and nirvana is the other shore. Sentient beings are in the great ocean of samsara, within the 3 realms, having not yet crossed the sea of suffering. Nirvana is the other shore, the other side of the ocean, so to speak. Here wisdom reaches the other shore. What does true wisdom reaching the other shore mean? It means the Buddha's wisdom has perfectly reached the other shore. Apart from the Buddha, the wisdom of any wise person or anyone else in the world has not yet reached the other shore. Therefore, for Prajnaparamita, you should understand it as wisdom reaching the other shore. Generally, when teaching the ornament of clear realization, it is called the perfection of wisdom, which is quite a complete term. However, in many current commentaries of Chinese Buddhism, the meaning of prajna or wisdom is present, but the perfection aspect is missing. Logically speaking, the phrase perfection of wisdom is more accurate. If the Heart Sutra were to be translated literally, it would be the perfection of wisdom Heart Sutra, the Heart Sutra of wisdom reaching the other shore. We usually speak of textual prajna, natural prajna, fruitional prajna, and path prajna, which are the 4 types of prajna. In fact, these 4 prajnas are 4 perfections of wisdom, or 4 Prajnaparamitas. Prajnaparamita is simply referred to as prajna. What are these 4 types of prajna? Everyone should also be clear that the 4 prajnas are actually categorized into the expressing prajna and the expressed prajna. There are 3 types of expressed prajna: natural prajna, fruitional prajna, and path prajna. These are what is expressed. Why is that so? Natural prajna is the essence of all phenomena, free from all conceptual elaboration. The Buddha relied on wisdom to perfectly comprehend the true nature of all phenomena, which is free from all conceptual elaboration. This is called fruinal prajna. Through what path was this comprehended? It was through the wisdom of the Bodhisattvas. Therefore, the wisdom of the Bodhisattvas is the path prajna. This is the expressed prajna. When we study Madhyamaka, we also learn about meaning Madhyamaka and textual Madhyamaka, which can be explained in this way. These are the 3 expressed prajnas. You should be clear about this. You can also call them the 3 expressed perfections of wisdom. Then what is the expressing perfection of wisdom? It perfectly expresses fruitional prajna and natural prajna, along with path prajna. The words and sentences of these 3 prajnas are called textual prajna. So, is the Heart Sutra ultimately textual prajna, or is it path prajna or fruitional prajna? From the perspective of manifestation, it is called textual prajna. Of course, textual prajna can also be divided into the textual prajna of the sutras and the textual prajna of the shastras. The textual prajna of the sutras is what we often refer to as the extensive Prajnaparamita sutras, the short ones, and the Heart Sutra. For instance, in Chinese Buddhism, there is the 600-volume extensive Prajnaparamita Sutra, which can all be encompassed within the Heart Sutra. These are called the textual prajna of the sutras. The root stanzas of the middle way, the 400 stanzas on the middle way, and so on, all belong to the textual prajna of the shastras. Therefore, regarding the meaning of prajna, everyone should understand it in this way. Next, the word heart in the Heart Sutra means the essence or the core. All the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha can be entirely included within emptiness, and the teachings on emptiness are found within Prajna. Generally speaking, many historical accounts say that during the Buddha's more than 40 years of turning the wheel of Dharma, 22 years were spent teaching Prajna and emptiness. Thus, all these teachings, given over 22 years, can be entirely included in the extensive, short, and middling Prajnaparamita Sutras. And these, in turn, can be condensed into the Heart Sutra. That is why it is called the core. You can understand it from this perspective. Furthermore, some eminent monks and great masters in the Han region, when they explain it, say the so-called Heart Sutra has 2 meanings. One is the core, and the other is one's own fundamental mind. For instance, in the Diamond Sutra, it says to arouse the mind without dwelling on anything. The mind mentioned here is exactly the same as the heart in the Heart Sutra. This kind of explanation also exists, but whether it is completely reasonable is not entirely clear. Generally speaking, all the core meanings and essential instructions are completely included in this Heart Sutra. Of course, you should be clear about what a sutra is. We have also often mentioned that there are permitted sutras and blessed sutras, as well as sutras spoken directly by the Buddha. There are many categories of sutras. This one should be a sutra spoken by the Buddha's blessing, because at that time the Buddha entered the profound samadhi of illumination. After he bestowed his blessing upon Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva began to speak. Some of our Dharma friends also say, "By your blessing, Master, my recent trip to propagate the Dharma and benefit beings went very smoothly. After I taught the Dharma, everyone praised it, saying it was a wonderful teaching." So this could indeed be true. If the Master has blessings and you deliver the teaching exceptionally well, then it might be considered a teaching given through blessing. This can also be seen in the text below. At that time, the Buddha said nothing and simply entered meditation. Later, after receiving the Buddha's blessing, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva began to declare, "Form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness is not different from form." He continued until the end. So it should be a sutra spoken through blessing. Therefore, this is the heart of the perfection of Wisdom Sutra. All right, that concludes our teaching for today.
Bandangara Padma Sodargye Bandangara Padma Sodargye Bandangara Padma Sodargye